Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and realized you no longer recognize the person staring back? Not because of age, but because of the quiet damage you've endured, one disappointment, one failure, one betrayal at a time. That's where our story begins, not with success, not with glory, but with collapse. There was a man who once thought he had it all together. A good job, predictable routines, a sense that life was moving somewhere. But like most illusions, it took only one unexpected turn to shatter everything. One morning, he woke up to find the email that ended his career, his company downsizing, his position erased with a line of text. At first, he told himself it was temporary, that he'd bounce back quickly. But weeks became months, and the silence that followed began to rot the edges of his mind. He stopped answering calls. He avoided friends who asked, "How are you holding up?" He wasn't holding up at all. He was sinking. The days blurred into each other, a cycle of empty promises: tomorrow I'll fix it, tomorrow I'll try again. But tomorrow never came. His apartment, once organized, became a reflection of his thoughts, scattered, heavy, without purpose. He started to believe that maybe this was it, the quiet ending of a once hopeful life. But life, in its strange cruelty, rarely ends in grand tragedy. It ends in small surrenders: the day you stop trying, the night you stop caring, the moment you stop believing that change is possible. And yet, it was precisely in this silence that something unexpected began to form, a whisper. A single, defiant question that refused to die: what if this isn't the end? What if this is where the real work begins? He didn't know it then, but that question was the spark of Stoicism, the ancient philosophy that teaches that the greatest power a man can ever hold is power over himself. Not over the world, not over fortune, but over the chaos within. That night, sitting in the dark with nothing left to lose, he stumbled upon an old book, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed. It was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled an empire yet wrote about inner peace as if it were the only kingdom worth conquering. The man began to read without expectation. And in those quiet words written nearly 2,000 years ago, he found something terrifyingly familiar: pain, confusion, and the fight to remain calm in a world that refused to be kind. Marcus had written, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Those words struck like lightning. Power over the mind. Not the situation. Not other people. The mind. The man closed the book and let the sentence echo in his head. If strength could come from within, then maybe he hadn't lost everything. Maybe he'd only lost sight of himself. The next morning, for the first time in months, he did something simple. He cleaned his apartment. Not because he felt better, but because he wanted to begin. Stoicism, he would later learn, isn't about waiting to feel ready, it's about acting with reason despite emotion. Every dish washed, every corner cleared, was a quiet rebellion against despair. It wasn't much, but it was movement. It was proof that even in ruin, one could rebuild, not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate acts of control. That was the first rule he unknowingly discovered: control what you can, accept what you can't. The storm outside was not his enemy. His own surrender was. By nightfall, the apartment looked different, not perfect, but alive. And something in him had shifted, almost imperceptibly. For the first time, he realized the truth, that rock bottom is not the end of a life, but the foundation of a stronger one. Have you ever wondered why the hardest battles are the ones no one else can see? The wars fought inside your own mind, the kind that don't leave scars, only silence. That's where he found himself, standing in the aftermath of his collapse, realizing that rebuilding wasn't about money, status, or revenge. It was about reclaiming the one thing life could never take unless he gave it up: his inner strength. Before we go further, remember this: if you stay till the end, you'll learn the timeless rule that even the ancient Stoics used to rebuild themselves when everything seemed lost. It's the principle that can turn any downfall into your greatest transformation. Days passed. Each morning, he woke before sunrise not because he had to, but because he needed to. The world outside was still quiet then, and in that stillness, he began to train his mind. No social media, no noise, no distractions. Just the breath. Inhale. Exhale. A simple act, but one that forced him to notice how much of his life had been lived in reaction, always chasing, always fearing, always waiting for something external to give him peace. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Peace is an internal discipline, not a reward granted by circumstance. You don't find it, you build it. He began journaling, writing not about what had happened, but about how he responded. The job loss, the failures, the isolation, they were facts. What tortured him was his interpretation of them. He realized he'd spent months fighting against things he could never control, while completely neglecting the one thing he could: his mindset. Every day, he wrote 3 questions in his notebook. What can I control today? What must I accept? What can I learn from this pain? At first, the answers came slowly, tangled in anger and regret. But as the days passed, something shifted. The fog began to lift. He started seeing patterns, the same emotional traps that had ruled his life for years. Fear of judgment. Need for validation. The constant craving for outcomes. He saw how every disappointment had only been magnified by his resistance to reality. Marcus Aurelius had said, "The obstacle is the way." Those words echoed in his mind until they began to take root. He started to test them. When he went for a job interview and was rejected again, instead of collapsing, he asked, "What lesson hides here?" When a friend distanced himself out of pity, he didn't lash out. He simply noted, "I cannot control how others see me. I can only control how I live." Each small decision, each reframed thought, became a brick in the new structure of his life, a structure built not on comfort, but on clarity. He began walking daily, not to escape his thoughts but to meet them. With each step, he practiced detachment. The world was still unfair. The world was still unpredictable. But the difference now was that he no longer demanded it to be otherwise. That's when he realized the second rule of rebuilding your life through Stoicism: you suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of what breaks you never happens outside your head. It lives in the stories you tell yourself about the pain. The man started to live differently. He no longer chased happiness, he built discipline. He no longer ran from discomfort, he faced it like an old friend. He learned that true strength isn't loud, it's silent, patient, and unshakable. The kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. And slowly, the man who once saw only loss began to see opportunity hidden in every hardship. His world hadn't changed, but he had. The awakening wasn't about escaping suffering. It was about mastering it. Have you ever noticed that the moments meant to destroy you are often the same ones that reveal who you really are? Pain has a strange way of exposing truth. It burns away everything false, everything weak, until only what's essential remains. That's what he was beginning to understand. His suffering wasn't punishment, it was purification. He started to see life differently. Every challenge became a test, a chance to apply the Stoic rules he was slowly engraving into his mind. When he failed, he no longer called himself a failure. He called it training. When he felt anger rise, he didn't deny it. He watched it, measured it, and let it pass. He was no longer at war with his emotions, he was studying them like a philosopher observing fire. One morning, he stood at his window and realized something profound: control isn't about force, it's about acceptance. A man who tries to dominate his circumstances becomes a slave to them. But a man who learns to move with life instead of against it, that man becomes free. Epictetus once said, "Circumstances don't make the man, they only reveal him to himself." Those words stayed with him. He began testing them in everyday moments: the coffee that spilled, the bus that left without him, the people who spoke without kindness. Each irritation became an exercise in composure. Not because he wanted to suppress emotion, but because he was learning to guide it. He realized that discipline was not cold, it was compassion with structure. When he forced himself to rise early, to meditate, to write, to stay calm when the world demanded reaction, he wasn't punishing himself. He was building the foundation of freedom. And then came the real test. One afternoon, he received a call from his former employer. A new project had opened, something temporary but familiar. It was a chance to return, to reclaim what he had lost. For a moment, old feelings resurfaced: the need to prove himself, the hunger to be validated. But this time, he paused. He sat quietly, recalling the months of silence, the pain, the lessons. He asked himself, do I want this because it aligns with who I've become, or because it reminds me of who I used to be? The answer came like calm water: he didn't need to go back. The man who had once begged for second chances now understood that the only chance worth taking was the one to keep moving forward. He politely declined. That single act, refusing the comfort of the past, was the moment he truly became free. Not because he won anything, but because he no longer feared losing. That's the third Stoic rule he uncovered: detach from outcomes, focus on actions. The world doesn't owe you success. It only offers you opportunities to act with virtue, courage, and integrity. What follows is never yours to own. The man no longer measured progress by what he achieved, but by how he behaved under pressure. His mind had become a fortress, not hardened, but stable. The storms still came, but they no longer shook his walls. And perhaps the greatest irony of all was this: the same fire that once threatened to consume him had now forged him into something unbreakable. Because that's what true discipline does: it doesn't eliminate pain, it transforms it into purpose. He had learned not to chase strength, but to live it quietly, steadily, like a flame that no longer fears the wind. Have you ever thought about what it truly means to rebuild your life, not just to fix what's broken, but to create something entirely new from the ruins? Most people want to go back to who they were before everything fell apart. But he had learned that this desire to return is what keeps us trapped in cycles of pain. You can't rebuild by looking backward. You rebuild by becoming someone who no longer needs what was lost. By now, he had changed in quiet ways that no one else could see. There was no announcement, no dramatic transformation. But inside, the ground beneath his mind was solid again. The same streets he used to walk with dread now felt peaceful. The same silence that once haunted him had become his teacher. He started living each day as the Stoics advised, not in pursuit of pleasure or comfort, but in alignment with virtue. When he woke, he asked himself, what does this day demand of me? When he slept, he asked, did I live with courage, reason, and gratitude? That was enough. But rebuilding wasn't just about philosophy. It was about facing the world again with strength, not avoidance. So he began applying his new foundation to life's realities. He started a small business, not because he was certain it would succeed, but because uncertainty no longer scared him. He reached out to people he had withdrawn from, not to impress them, but to practice honesty. He walked into each situation without pretending to know the outcome, and that humility became his quiet power. There were still days of doubt. Days when his old mind whispered that none of this would last. But instead of resisting those thoughts, he watched them pass, just as Marcus Aurelius had written, when you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. That one idea reminded him that existence itself was enough reason to try again. And soon, something miraculous began to happen. Life started responding differently. Opportunities that had once seemed distant appeared naturally. Conversations felt deeper. Even failure didn't sting as it once had. Because now, he didn't see failure as a verdict. He saw it as information, a signal pointing to where growth was still possible. That's the fourth Stoic rule he lived by: progress, not perfection. You're not meant to be flawless. You're meant to be better than yesterday. He learned to carry his past like a teacher, not a burden. Every scar became a reminder that pain had purpose, that destruction and creation often walk hand in hand. The very things that had once broken him had, in truth, been preparing him to become unshakable. He found peace not in control, but in surrender. He found strength not in dominance, but in discipline. And most of all, he found meaning not in the grand moments, but in the small, deliberate acts of living well. In the end, rebuilding wasn't about success at all. It was about alignment between thought and action, intention and reality. That's what the Stoics had always meant when they spoke of virtue, not a moral code, but a harmony within the soul. And when harmony returns, life begins again, not from where it ended, but from where truth begins. Have you ever realized that everything you've been searching for, peace, confidence, direction, was never meant to be found outside you? That all along, it's been waiting in the quiet place beneath your thoughts? That's what he finally understood. After months of struggle, reflection, and discipline, he discovered that true strength isn't built, it's remembered. Because it was always there. Buried, but never gone. The man who once defined himself by loss now defined himself by resilience. He no longer feared uncertainty, he welcomed it. He didn't crave comfort, he respected discomfort. He saw every day as a new test of his philosophy, a chance to practice control, gratitude, and clarity. He stopped wishing for easier circumstances. Instead, he wished for stronger character. That's what the Stoics meant when they said, "Don't pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to endure a difficult one." There were still challenges. There always are. A business partner betrayed his trust. A family member fell ill. Life, as always, remained unpredictable. But the difference was this: he no longer reacted like before. He faced each storm with quiet composure, repeating to himself, "This, too, is part of the path." That was his fifth and final rule: amor fati, love your fate. Not tolerate it. Not endure it. Love it. Every twist, every setback, every heartbreak, he saw them now as essential parts of his journey, shaping him into the man he was meant to become. And in loving his fate, he found the highest form of freedom, the freedom to live without resistance. He no longer measured life by wins and losses, but by how deeply he could remain at peace through both. One night, he returned to his old journal, the one filled with pain, confusion, and despair. He read through the words of the man he once was, and instead of shame, he felt gratitude. Because that broken version of himself had carried him here. That version had chosen to rebuild when it would have been easier to quit. He wrote one last entry. "I no longer need the world to be calm for me to find peace. I have become the calm." That was the moment he realized the secret the Stoics had been trying to teach all along, that life doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And once you've built that strength, no one can take it from you. So if you're listening to this now, and you feel lost, broken, or stuck, remember this: you don't need to start over. You just need to start within. The strength you're searching for is already inside you, waiting for you to remember it. Rebuild not from what you've lost, but from what you've learned. Because every ending, every fall, every heartbreak is not the destruction of who you are, it's the awakening of who you're meant to be. And when you finally see that truth, nothing outside you can ever break you again. Have you ever wondered what remains after the storm passes, after the noise fades, after the world stops demanding your attention? What's left when everything temporary falls away? That's the question he faced in the quiet that followed his rebuilding. Because once you've rebuilt your life, once you've found your strength again, there's one final test: learning to live in peace with yourself. He had changed so much that even his thoughts moved differently now, slower, calmer, intentional. The urgency that once controlled his every decision had dissolved. He no longer chased meaning, he lived it. Each morning, he rose before the sun, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. He didn't rush through his days. He experienced them every moment, every breath, as if they were fragile gifts he'd once taken for granted. That's when he began to understand the sixth Stoic truth: stillness is strength. The ability to remain composed, present, and grounded no matter what chaos surrounds you, that is the highest form of mastery. In stillness, he saw everything clearly. He saw that people spend their lives trying to prove something to the world, forgetting that the world forgets fast. That most of what we chase, status, validation, applause, fades the moment we stop feeding it. But the person who learns to be still, to find peace within, becomes untouchable. He no longer needed to announce his growth. He didn't crave recognition or praise. His victories were internal, measured by how calmly he could face uncertainty, by how kindly he could respond to cruelty, by how deeply he could forgive those who never apologized. That's the quiet paradox of Stoicism: the more you let go of control, the more powerful you become. Because peace isn't found in dominance, it's found in detachment. And so, he lived differently. He walked slower, spoke less, listened more. The world still moved fast, chasing illusions, but he had learned to stay still while it rushed around him. He became like a mountain, unchanged by the winds that once terrified him. One evening, as he sat watching the city lights flicker below, he smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was enough. He finally understood that rebuilding your life isn't a one-time act. It's a lifelong practice. Every day offers a new chance to begin again. Every setback, a new opportunity to rise stronger. Every breath, a reminder that peace is not something to earn, it's something to protect. And maybe that's what the Stoics were truly teaching all along: that strength isn't measured by how hard you fight the world, but by how softly you can rest within it. So, if you've fallen, if you're lost, if life feels too heavy, remember, the same fire that destroyed your past can forge your future. Rebuild slowly. Live deliberately. And when the noise of the world grows too loud, return to stillness. Because stillness is where you'll find yourself again. Have you ever asked yourself what it truly means to be unbreakable? Not in body or reputation, but in spirit, in the space between your thoughts where doubt tries to take root. That's the final evolution of rebuilding, not just surviving chaos, but mastering your mind so deeply that chaos becomes irrelevant. He had rebuilt his life, yes, but now he was building something greater: peace that could not be taken, no matter the circumstance. He called it the unshakable mind. It began one morning with a test he didn't see coming. A sudden downturn in the economy hit his new business hard. Contracts were cancelled, clients disappeared, and fear began whispering again. The same voice that had haunted him during his collapse years ago, the one that said, "You'll lose it all again." But this time, he smiled. Not because he was unaffected, but because he recognized the voice. It was his old self, desperate to regain control. And he had learned what the Stoics had always known: your thoughts are not commands, they're visitors. You don't have to obey them. He let the fear speak, then watched it fade into silence. Then he got to work, not panicking, not complaining, simply acting. He called clients, restructured plans, adapted. He didn't ask for certainty, he focused on clarity. Because a Stoic doesn't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" He asks, "What can I do about it?" That's when the sixth rule revealed its deeper truth: the mind becomes unshakable when it no longer depends on outcomes. He realized that peace wasn't the absence of problems, it was the refusal to be defined by them. No situation could control him anymore, because he had trained his perception. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He started viewing adversity as exercise. Each difficulty strengthened his mind like a muscle under pressure. Anger became his test of patience. Fear, his test of courage. Disappointment, his test of endurance. And soon, what once would have shattered him barely stirred him. Because he had discovered the power of indifference to chaos. Not emotional numbness, but emotional discipline, the ability to feel everything without being consumed by anything. Friends began noticing the difference. "You're calmer," they said. "Even when everything's uncertain." He didn't boast or explain. He simply nodded, knowing that calm isn't something you display, it's something you become. He no longer prayed for good days. He prayed for strength to meet whatever days came. He no longer hoped for an easy path. He hoped for the wisdom to walk the hard one with grace. That's the gift of Stoicism, the realization that you can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. And when you master that skill, life stops feeling like a storm. It starts feeling like navigation. He had become unshakable not because the world had softened, but because his mind had become still. So if you want to rebuild your life, begin here, learn to master your reactions. Don't fight your emotions, understand them. Don't chase control, cultivate clarity. When you stop letting the outside world dictate your inner world, you've already won. Because the mind, once disciplined, becomes the greatest fortress in existence, one no hardship can breach, no loss can weaken, and no fear can command. Have you ever noticed how life always brings you back to where you started, only this time, you return wiser, calmer, and less afraid? That's what he felt one morning when he stood at the same bus stop where, years ago, he had broken down after losing everything. The world around him hadn't changed much, the same cracked pavement, the same gray skyline, but he had. Completely. Back then, this place had symbolized failure. Now, it felt like proof of rebirth. He was no longer haunted by the ghosts of his past, because he had made peace with them. He realized that rebuilding your life isn't about erasing your history, it's about integrating it. Every scar, every regret, every sleepless night, they weren't stains. They were scriptures. Records of transformation. He had once begged for the world to change. Now, he thanked it for being cruel enough to force him to grow. That's the seventh Stoic rule he had lived into: nothing that happens to you is wasted if you learn from it. He had learned that people who try to avoid suffering end up fragile. But those who embrace it, who walk through it consciously, come out unbreakable. Pain had been his first teacher. Stillness, his second. Together, they had shaped him into something extraordinary, not perfect, but whole. That wholeness began to radiate into every part of his life. When others complained, he listened with patience. When others panicked, he offered calm. When others doubted themselves, he reminded them that strength isn't born, it's remembered. He had become the kind of person he used to look for in others. The one who doesn't just speak about peace but is peace. And soon, he began sharing what he'd learned. Not as a preacher, but as a fellow traveler on the same rough road. He started writing again, not about success or ambition, but about resilience, the art of surviving with dignity. His words began to reach others who were lost, broken, hopeless. And every time someone said, "Your story helped me," he smiled, not out of pride, but gratitude. Because in helping others rebuild, he realized he had completed his own reconstruction. He had come full circle. And perhaps that's the hidden meaning of rebuilding your life. It's not just about standing again, it's about lifting others once you do. Because strength hoarded dies with you. But strength shared becomes legacy. He often thought of Marcus Aurelius' words: "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That was his creed now. He didn't talk about wisdom, he lived it. He didn't seek admiration, he gave understanding. He didn't need to be remembered, he needed to be useful. And in that simplicity, he found peace deeper than he had ever known. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of purpose. So, if you've listened this far, remember, rebuilding your life is not a single act, it's a lifelong circle. You fall, you rise, you learn, and then you teach. The process never ends, and it's not meant to. Because the moment you stop growing, you start breaking. He had rebuilt his life from dust, but more than that, he had rebuilt himself into a fortress of clarity, discipline, and calm. And now, every sunrise reminded him of one unshakable truth: you can't control how your story begins, but you can always decide how it continues. Have you ever wondered what it means to truly finish a journey, not by reaching a destination, but by understanding the path itself? That's where he found himself now, years after the collapse that had once defined him. The man who had been lost, broken, and desperate now sat in quiet reflection, realizing that the life he had rebuilt was more than a series of victories. It was a testament to the timeless rules that govern inner strength. He understood, finally, that life will never stop testing you. Pain will return, uncertainty will appear, and disappointment will knock on your door. But the difference now was profound: he no longer feared it. The lessons of Stoicism had anchored him, and the storms that once threatened to destroy him now only polished the edges of his resolve. He thought of the first lesson he had learned: control what you can, accept what you can't. He recalled nights spent staring at the ceiling, paralyzed by events beyond his reach. Now, he approached each problem with clarity, asking only what was within his power and letting go of the rest. He remembered the second rule: you suffer more in imagination than in reality. How often had he magnified every fear, every imagined failure? Now he laughed quietly at the folly, knowing that most suffering exists only in the mind. The third rule: detach from outcomes, focus on actions. Every decision he made now was deliberate, grounded in reason, not in desire for recognition or reward. The world could take everything away, but it could never touch his discipline, his integrity, or his courage. The fourth: progress, not perfection. He had learned to forgive himself, to embrace mistakes, and to measure success by growth, not by applause. The fifth: amor fati, love your fate. Life was no longer a series of misfortunes to endure, it was a teacher to embrace. Every trial became an opportunity to become stronger, wiser, and more patient. The sixth: stillness is strength. In silence, he had discovered the deepest power of all, the ability to remain unshaken, calm, and centered, even when the world demanded otherwise. And the seventh: nothing that happens to you is wasted if you learn from it. Every scar, every heartbreak, every failure had contributed to the man he had become. They were not setbacks, they were steps. He smiled, thinking of all those who might never discover these truths. So many people spend their lives running from pain, chasing external validation, and searching for shortcuts to peace. But the real journey, he knew now, is within. The true conquest is mastering your mind, shaping your character, and living in alignment with what matters most. The man closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of growth simultaneously. He knew he was not perfect, but he was strong. Not because life had spared him, but because he had faced it, accepted it, and turned every challenge into a stepping stone. And as the sun rose over the horizon, spilling light across the city, he felt a profound certainty: no matter what storms may come, no matter how uncertain the path, he had learned the eternal lesson. Strength is not given. Peace is not granted. Happiness is not found. They are built stone by stone, day by day, inside a mind that refuses to be broken. So, if you are listening now, lost or broken or uncertain, remember this: the power to rebuild your life has always been inside you. You don't need someone else to save you. You don't need circumstances to align. You need courage, discipline, and the willingness to begin again within yourself. Because life will always challenge you, but it can never defeat the one who has mastered their own mind.